Okay, so this video is going to serve as just a quick introduction to our next model. It's called the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. And this model takes Keynes's original ideas and it builds on them. And so what we want to start off doing is kind of compare and contrast Keynes's original model, the aggregate expenditures model, with what's going to become this aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, the ADAS model. Now, the first thing to remember about Keynes is that he was building his theory, building his model during the Great Depression, when we had widespread and persistent market failure. And one of the things that he noticed during the Great Depression is that there were a lot of resources that were not being used. So this means there's a lot of labor not being used, there's high unemployment, but there's also a lot of land and capital not being used as well. And so we refer to this as slack. And slack means that you've got extra of something. All right. And so what that means for the economy is when there's a great deal of slack, when there's a lot of unused resources, it's going to cause the prices of those resources to fall. Because if you think about it, if there's more of something available, then its value is going to go down, right? And if there's less of something available, well, then its value goes up. So in the labor market, when there are a lot of workers unemployed, that means that the workers are probably going to be willing to work for pretty low wages. So if I'm a firm and I want to start hiring more workers to start producing more, I don't have to worry about paying anyone any higher wages because there's so many people willing to work. I can attract workers just by saying, hey, I'll just pay you, a bare minimum wage. And so I can keep producing more and more and hiring more and more workers without having to pay higher prices. And if I'm not having to pay higher prices, if I'm not having to pay higher wages for the land, labor, and capital that I'm using, then that means the prices of my goods and services that I produce are also not going to go up. And so one thing we see as a result of a great deal of economic slack is that as the economy starts to pick up, as the economy starts to grow and output starts to rise, we're going to start to take up that slack, but it's going to be quite some time before we run out of that slack. And so in the meantime, we're going to be able to produce more, but we're not going to worry about inflation. There's going to be little to no risk of inflation because, again, all those workers out there, all the land and capital owners, they want their resources to be used and they're willing to accept whatever price, whatever wage, rent, or interest they can. And so a lot of slack leads to sticky prices, it leads to sticky wages, which means we can stimulate the economy, right? We, the government, can step in. This is one of Keynes's new ideas. One of his new policy suggestions is that, well, if households and firms aren't spending and foreigners aren't spending, government can step in, spend some more money, stimulate the economy with little to no risk of inflation. And then this comes back to the multiplier effect. So we went through this example the other day in class where government may spend some money. That turns into income for somebody else. They're going to save some of it, and they'll spend some of it, and then that becomes income from someone else, and so on and so on. And so that multiplier effect is going to be very large when the economy has a lot of slack. Because if prices aren't going to be budging, if prices are sticky, wages are sticky, there's little to no risk of inflation, that multiplier effect is going to basically reach 100% of its potential. All of those dollars are going to be spent, and they're going to be spent on output. They're going to be spent on goods and services, new goods and services that are being produced. Now, we're going to take Keynes's original analysis of the aggregate expenditures, and that's going to become the demand side of our model. So that's another big difference is that Keynes's model was very much focused on the demand side of the economy, and we're going to take that demand side analysis, but now we're going to add to it a supply side analysis. So we're going to see what's going on the supply side of the economy. And this is going to create a few other differences. So another thing we're going to see is that once we combine both supply and demand into the same model, we're going to see now that prices may start to rise. They don't become sticky, they become flexible. This is going to have an impact on the multiplier effect as a result. Because once prices start to rise, remember that when prices rise, we lose purchasing power. Each dollar is going to be worth just a little bit less. Well, the multiplier effect, as we're going to see, is still going to be present in this new ADAS model. And for a period of time, maybe it'll be a relatively large multiplier effect. Maybe prices will stay stuck for a little while. But as we're going to see in the model, eventually prices are going to start to rise. And as prices start to rise, we lose purchasing power. And so every time that dollar that's being multiplied, every time it's being spent again and again, it's going to lose a little bit of value every time it's spent. And what that means for the economy is that the economy will still grow, right? We're still spending more money, but in terms of the goods and services that we're going to be producing, it's not going to be quite as much as when prices were sticky, when there was little to no risk of inflation. And so the next thing we'll do is we're going to build the model. We're just going to very quickly define aggregate demand, aggregate supply, talk very briefly about the determinants of each, and this will be very similar on the supply side at least to what we saw at the micro level. And then we're going to start to do some dynamic analysis in this aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. And so what that's going to allow us to do is ask, well, if something changes in the economy, if there's something that changes on the demand side of the economy, or if there's something that changes on the supply side of the economy, what's it going to look like in our model, and what does the model predict will be the result with respect to our three macro variables? What is going to happen to output, what is going to happen to unemployment, and what is going to happen to the price level as a result of some change in the economy?